Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes, a podcast where we explore the intersection of art, culture, and big ideas. I'm your host, Sean Malone, creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education and creator of Out of Frame video essay series on YouTube. Here in studio, as per usual, with Paul Nelson, our head of social media and senior marketing manager, and Jen Maffasanti, who is on the video screen next to me and is the director of communications for the Libertas Institute in Utah. Jen, how are you doing?
I am doing well. Got family in town. Got the kid's birthday coming up. It's
Nice.
Great time.
Sounds great. You sound thrilled.
It's stressful, and I have to bake, which I don't usually do. I cook a lot. I don't do a lot of baking, but you know, it's for the kid's birthday. I'm not gonna buy their birthday cake.
Oh,
I have some standards for myself.
You would buy a birthday cake. You would 100% buy a birthday cake.
no, I don't do the baking in my house. My wife does, and she's an amazing baker.
Yeah.
Like, she made some lemon cupcakes the other day for our son's 3rd birthday.
Oh, that's quite nice.
Oh my gosh, homemade everything.
Well,
wow.
Nice.
Marion's pretty good. She's pretty good at baking. I do probably the majority of cooking, but she does bake pretty well. She's a pretty good cook as well. But
Me and Mark, I smoke the meats.
I do all of the meats pretty much at this point. Like anything meat related, I end up doing.
What about meat adjacent?
Yeah.
So like a chili?
Yeah. I mean, I did the chili recently. I actually made chili. Oh, this was actually a great thing.
Oh, it
We're
looked
just
gorgeous.
starting right off on food talk here, but I took.
It's a big food podcast.
So I had. That's right. So I had. So I've done this in the past where I've made my own chili sauce, which, by the way, I highly encourage everybody to do because it's not that hard, and it really amps up anything you do that requires anything like a chili sauce. So basically, you can buy dried chilies of almost innumerable varieties all over the place. Super easy. I mean, honestly, probably a Hispanic grocery store is probably your best bet, but like you can find them in Publix or wherever you go, you can find bags and bags of dried chilies. But what I've done in the past with chili is I've made errors on ratios of chilies, and it's hard to do if you just like decide that you're going to pick like, let's say 3 anchos and then like a couple guajillos and then like a couple, dried like chipotles or something like that. It's hard to tell on the front end when they're dried before you've like turned them into sauce. Like it's hard to tell exactly what spice level everything's going to be, and you can't be very precise about what you're doing. And I like hot food, but most of the people that I live with are not so inclined to hot food. And in fact, my mother-in-law is not particularly at all. So what I did this time is I made 4 separate chili sauces, all with like 1 chili each, and then blended after the fact. And it's super easy to do. You just like basically, you don't even have to do this, but it's good to toast the chilies a little bit first, like in a pan. Actually, strong piece of advice, do not burn them. Burning them releases all of the capsaicin in a cloud, which is quite literally pepper spray.
Yep.
You do not want this.
No.
This is very bad to have in your house, so don't burn them.
Important safety tip, guys.
But toast them a little bit and then drop them in a blender, cover them in boiling water and let that just steep for 10 minutes or so. Blend it up, add a little bit of salt, maybe a little bit of pepper, depending on what you want flavor-wise, and that's it. That's it. Just puree steeped chilies in, steeped dried chilies. It's basically a very thick version of tea that you then blend up and turn into a thing. It's awesome.
Yep.
So,
and then after the fact, so I made one with anchos, I made one with pasillas and guajillos, and then one with chiles de arbol, which are very hot. And after the fact, prepared my blend and then turned that into like a meat chili, which is great.
So I got 2 questions for you.
Smart.
Oh,
First,
so good.
the first is about your chili. The second one, we'll get it. You and I will get it. I want to know what Jen's thoughts
All right.
are. Do you put beans in your chili?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
I'm a bean guy too. I mean, there's people from Texas make a big deal out of it. Oh, you don't put beans in your chili, and people from Cincinnati, stuff like that. Like,
no, to be fair, I don't understand what Cincinnati people are doing with chili most of the time. What they're really making is like hot dog chili.
I mean, that's Cincinnati. It's a hot dog town.
Well, which is fine, but it's like that's basically sloppy joes.
Yeah. No, I mean it's sloppy Joe.
It's fine, but a chili is a stew, in my conception of things, right? So yeah, there are beans. So the chili included a whole bunch of meat, which is just chuck roast, essentially, cubed up, which I browned up a little bit, threw in the pot. I got some andouille sausage, threw that in there, some red beans, some black beans.
Nice.
And it's a nice mix. Onions, poblanos, jalapenos. Pretty much it.
Sounds like a good chili.
Whole bunch of chili sauce. And a little bit of tomato sauce. That was it.
Okay. Second question.
And then, slow cooker for like all day.
All day.
Yeah.
Second question.
Oh, yeah.
As a good Midwestern boy yourself.
Yes, sir.
Did you make cinnamon rolls with these?
Did. My wife did. She did. She made cinnamon rolls. She did, though. She did cream cheese frosting because she feels strongly that a cinnamon roll should have cream cheese frosting. I'll be honest, though. I think I would have done just a glaze. Because I think the cream cheese frosting. So this is a very Nebraska and I suppose Kansas specific thing. Like you really don't get this outside of there. But you'll notice that if you have cinnamon rolls with your chili, you kind of want to peel off a piece and dip.
A little bit.
Sometimes.
Or take a spoonful.
Take a spoonful and take a bite. The problem with the cream cheese frosting is you can't really do that.
No.
Like if you have a little glaze, it works. But the cream cheese frosting makes it absolutely impossible to dip. Right. You do not want to dip a cream cheese frosted cinnamon roll in some chili. It's a bad idea. Yeah. But
cinnamon rolls and chili, it's the best combination known to man.
It's not bad. Actually, I think it's highly underrated and most people do not realize it and don't expect it.
I tell people that this combination exists.
Oh, and their minds are blown.
They think I'm lying.
They think you're lying, and
because until this conversation, I knew that Sean had made chili and that his wife had made cinnamon rolls. I didn't realize there was supposed to be a connection there.
Correct. That was a pairing.
It's the pairing.
That was a pairing. So the thing you got to think about, I mean, and I don't exactly know how to describe this.
Sweet and salty.
But what I would say, so there's sweet and salty, but there's also the fact that I added some cumin, because
you have to.
You have to. But you can always add a little bit of cinnamon into a chili if you make it. And I mean, you're talking about. I like to add
cocoa powder.
See, I understand why, right? But if you added a little bit of cocoa powder, and again, you don't want to add sugar, but you're going to add some cocoa powder, a little bit of cinnamon, some cumin, because what you're looking at is like a whole bunch of warm flavors, right? And warm, just really. And also, that's what I ended up really liking about the chili sauce that I made. It was like a whole mostly it was the ancho, pasilla, and guajillo with like a little bit of the arbol. The arbol's like hot, but it's a really broad. It's a really broad hot. It's not like a sharp right on one spot in your tongue or like cayenne does this thing at the back of your throat, and then different chilies have different sort of placements of hot. But arbol is just very hot everywhere in a very broad way. Every other chili I used was mild to medium, but also very warm. Just very warm. What?
I had a really bad joke.
Man. Okay, so
all right.
Fun fact, my sons have asked for chili for their birthday dinner.
Yeah.
I always prepare whatever dinner, whatever the birthday person wants.
But you have twins, so that gets tricky.
But I have twins. I do ask for a consensus on the cake and for the meal. And generally, they're on the same page about the cake and the meal every year. This year, they asked for a horchata cake.
Ooh.
And they asked for chili for dinner.
See, this is actually
my usual chili recipe.
It's pretty darn close.
It's pretty close. It's almost a cinnamon roll pairing. See?
I mean, it's vanilla and cinnamon. That's the flavor of the cake. So
I feel like you should still make some cinnamon rolls.
I've never had a horchata cake. I love horchata. This actually sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah.
If it works out, I'll send you the recipe.
Please do. I would like to try that. But look, it's a great pairing, and it's like sweet and salty, sweet and savory, and then like this sort of warm spice of cinnamon sort of ties the whole thing together.
On the surface, it doesn't seem like it should work, but it works.
It absolutely works. It makes sense.
Okay.
I don't really know who started it or why it started in kind of southeastern Nebraska, northeastern Kansas, that kind of area. Not really sure why it did that.
I mean, I know why.
Huh?
Just the best. I mean, Kansas just consistently churns out the best of everything. The sexiest man alive.
Oh, it's true. Paul Rudd. Getting back into some hot entertainment talk here. Paul Rudd.
You know what? I don't disagree. I've had a crush on Paul Rudd since.
You know what? Paul's.
To Paul. Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll do it. But look, here's the thing. Paul Rudd is funny, ages backwards somehow, and great dad, as far as I can tell. Good buddies with Weird Al, which I think is high marks for that.
For sure.
You know, I mean,
yeah, he's living his life.
I have nothing bad to say about Paul Rudd at all. I don't think anybody does.
No,
I've never heard a bad word about Paul Rudd. It's a little bit like John Hamm. I think they're similar in a lot of ways. St. Louis boy, but I guess St. Louis is different. But but I gotta say, John Hamm, similar.
John
Seems
Hamm,
like a super nice guy.
He was in Curb Your Enthusiasm, second episode this season.
Really?
It's pretty funny.
John Hamm is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
John Hamm is one of these guys.
He is hilarious.
Look, I didn't want to distract from the Paul Rudd conversation, but I will say Paul Rudd, John Hamm. I'm gonna put these two are in very similar categories, but I think they fall on one side or the other of the middle line that I'm about to describe. John Hamm is funnier than such a handsome man has any right to be.
Okay.
Paul Rudd is handsomer than any man as funny as Paul Rudd has a right to be. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I will allow that.
I think you're just on either side of those lines. Paul Rudd, I think of first and foremost as being incredibly funny. John Hamm, I think first and foremost as being Don Draper, even though he is tremendously funny.
Gotcha. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So where would Chris Pratt land on your...
Well, Chris Pratt's just a funny man who then got ripped.
Yeah.
Which I think is different. Paul Rudd has always been an attractive man. He's been doughier in years past. Mm-hmm. He got an Ant-Man Marvel movie shape, you know, which he didn't really need to because also his character is not the most ripped of all of these characters. He's an engineer in that movie. He's like an electrical engineer who became a superhero.
After going to prison, let's not forget.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I don't know. Look, I think Ant-Man is an underrated Marvel film. Actually, I think people give Ant-Man...
I agree.
I think people really don't like Ant-Man very much, but I think there's a lot to its credit. Although, I'm actually really excited about this because this allowed me a transition that I did not know I was going to get, which is that the original director of Ant-Man was set to be Edgar Wright, who directed the film that we're about to talk about today on this episode.
This is why we're professionals. This is why we get paid the big bucks.
It's true. So a lot of what I really love about Ant-Man sort of held over from Edgar Wright's original script. Like probably all the stuff with the toy train set battle with Thomas the Tank Engine and stuff, and all of that stuff is a very Edgar Wright sort of thing. Having Ant-Man run around a turntable with a record on it while music is playing is a very Edgar Wright sort of thing. And when he left the project, a lot of his script, I think, stayed in place. And I think those were a couple of those moments. But speaking of Edgar Wright, the movie that we wanted to talk to you guys about today is Edgar Wright's latest movie called Last Night in Soho, which, unlike last week's boring morass of a film, this is one of my favorite films of the last 2 years. I'm going right out there with it. It's one of my favorite films of the last 2 years. Hands down.
You know what? I would agree. I would say the same.
I got asked a few months ago. I got asked by a friend of mine who hadn't seen in a long time. We were at a conference together, and he asked me like what my favorite movie of the last 2 years was, and I just sighed heavily, and I was like, dude, I gotta go to the internet and look up what all movies I have seen in the last 2 years, because none particularly stand out to me. Like, there are not many. Now I know you're gonna say Fat Man.
I mean, that's the only one, though.
It's an obvious choice, and I mentioned Fat Man when I was talking to him about it. In fact, but because nobody's seen Fat Man, but they should. As we're coming back into Christmas season.
Ooh, we should do a little anniversary something.
Look, honestly, it's about time for us to
revisit
to revisit Fat Man.
To revisit?
Look, it's Christmas movie season, and I think Fat Man's got to get into the rotation.
Yeah.
So, I was really hard pressed to think of anything. I mean, I went back over the last 2 years of cinema. It's been, it's been delays and just trash and hashtag content and anything that you can think of that is just, the best you can say about it is, well, they got it done. They completed that movie. Yeah. And they released it.
Yeah.
To audiences.
That is a movie that exists.
I mean, even things like I saw on Instagram the other. Speaking of Chris Pratt, Chris Pratt got voted, handsomest man or something, People's Choice Awards for his portrayal of whatever character he played in the Tomorrow War, and then the Tomorrow War got like 7 other nominations for People's Choice Awards and stuff like that. And I was like, yes, that's exactly correct. Boo, because
it was fine.
It was not good. It doesn't deserve awards. like I don't know what we're doing. There's so many movies. Or the Extraction, The Old Guard.
These last 2 years was a time for television just because of all the challenges. Yeah. But because all the things I think of, Tiger King.
Tiger King stands out, but Squid Game stands out.
And there's a lot of Succession. There's a lot of television.
So I still haven't watched Succession. People are talking to me about that right now. I'm not really sure what's going on with it. But, couldn't think of any movies. It was very, very difficult to think. But Last Night in Soho is way up there on my list. And it is for several reasons, which we'll get into in a little bit. But first, I just want to get first thoughts. Jen, you kind of agreed with me.
Oh, this movie was beautiful. It was exquisite. Like, it's a horror movie, but it's not like super scary, but at the same time it's very thrilling. And I recently got a Fitbit, and I only bring that up because I noticed that my heart rate was about 20 beats per minute faster than usual throughout this entire movie. And I'm just sitting in a chair watching a thing,
and
right?
To be
I'm
clear,
not actually doing anything. But
it's not like Interstellar or Gravity or something that's like really trying to amp you up because of terror of
no. It was
situation.
Just like an exciting an exciting story. It was thrilling in every conceivable sense of the term.
Paul,
I can't disagree, or I can't agree with Jen. Really, more than that. I have a couple very minor quibbles, mainly in the second act.
Okay.
Thought it ran a little long.
All right.
Maybe like 10 minutes.
We'll talk about that.
But overall, loved it.
I would call this movie, and I've tried to, because I've had to describe it to people several times over the last couple weeks, really, because it's hard to, if you just called it a horror movie, you really wouldn't capture its essence at all.
I hate horror movies.
I'm not a big fan of the genre as well, and so if you just called it a horror movie, it really wouldn't work. If you just called it a thriller, I also don't think it would quite capture its essence. So I've taken to describing it as sort of Hitchcockian as a movie. It's a very Alfred Hitchcock sort of movie. There's a lot of psychological aspects to it, and there's a lot of mystery aspects to it, but there are also some very terrifying specific scenes that are kind of psycho type scenes, and there's some I actually feel like particularly coming into the third act, I think there's a scene that I might even just call an homage to Psycho in a lot of ways. I mean, I think there's a particular moment that I'm thinking of that just feels very much like the shower scene from that movie. But in a good way, in an homage kind of way. And I think that he really tapped into a lot of aspects that I think make Hitchcock such a masterful director, which is like he's playing with your sense of suspense, but the vast majority of every Hitchcock movie is not jump scares and like dark hallways, or like it's a really beautifully told story about characters that hopefully you are invested in and actually care about, and you care about their goings on and what they're doing and what their motivations are. It's just that their motivations, in many cases, and especially in this movie, very pure motivations, lead them accidentally down a road that they didn't anticipate. And then you end up with some shocking twists and turns for that character. But by that point, you also are really rooting for that character. And I cannot think of any new actress that I have seen in years who I think is more adorable than Thomasin McKenzie in this role as Eloise. She was great in Jojo Rabbit, which I did an Out of Frame episode on. But like, she's just charming, like just completely and utterly believable as this sort of small town country girl who has big aspirations as a fashion designer in London. I mean, that's we should probably talk about the plot in general. But basically, I mean, the plot's fairly straightforward. It's Eloise, this girl played by Thomasin McKenzie, goes to London to attend fashion school. It's her biggest dream in life. It's the only thing she wants to do. But she has a little bit of a weird character trait where she can, it's unclear if it's, at least at the beginning, it's unclear if it's hallucinations or something else, but she has fits where she sees her mother, mostly, who has died, and so she's, not fully stable as a person, but she is absolutely adorable, and she is well-intended. She's a very good person, and a very quiet.
She's very earnest.
She's very earnest and introspective, and like, she just wants to be a great fashion designer, and she doesn't really have any ego or anything that's, But she goes to fashion school, and she lives in the dorms, and the dorms are a pretty bad experience for her, which I empathize with a little bit too, because it's a very chaotic dorm situation. Her roommate's very egotistical and kind of outgoing, and she sort of throws a party the first night, and it's just very uncomfortable for somebody who grew up in the country with no siblings, as far as I can tell, and big empty space to herself. And so she ends up moving out, and she moves into an apartment that is hasn't changed since the 1960s, is basically. And this is the perfect thing for her. She's got a thing for the 60s. She loves 60s fashion. She loves 60s music. So moving into this apartment is quiet. It's a great space for her, and it just fits her vibe perfectly until the nightmares begin, at which point she starts having a different situation. So we can get into that in a minute. But basically, like, when she first moves into this apartment, she has this dream, and the dream is super real and vivid, and she sort of swaps places with a young woman in, I guess we've decided it's 1965, because we see a movie poster for Thunderball, or a marquee for Thunderball, the James Bond movie, and she's just living it up in 1960s, bright, exciting London, right? And that's everything she ever wanted. And over time, she keeps swapping places with this woman named Sandy in the 1960s, played by Anna Taylor-Joy. And as she swaps places, she slowly gets to the darker, more distressing parts of Sandy's existence. And it gets progressively more disturbing and dangerous, and what starts as this very dream-like wonderful environment turns nightmarish for poor dear Eloise, who we've come to immediately love. So it's a it's pretty interesting. And honestly, the filmmaking, especially, I want to talk about this at length. I want to get your guys' thoughts before I get there, but like, just the thing of how Edgar Wright swaps their places. There's a lot of mirrors and different ways of trading places with these two characters between Thomasin McKenzie and Anna Taylor-Joy, and it's just some masterful work from a man who's one of my favorite directors. So, Paul, what are your...
No, so I watched this movie. You had told me about the stuff, and I was looking for the swap places and things like that, and it looked like to me it was a lot of in-camera effects. So I looked up the cinematographer. It was on my phone. It was Chung Hoon Chung, and what was so fascinating about this is this movie could have easily been less effective if it wasn't for the cinematography.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't just big beautiful vistas like Dune.
Yeah.
Which is we talked about.
We talked about
it. That stuff still frustrates me. But the cinematography actually plays a role in this.
Yes.
It actually gets you into into Anya Taylor-Joy's character, and seeing her from Eloise's perspective, but then also seeing Eloise from
her perspective,
Sandy's perspective, which is fascinating. And it's all in camera.
And there's so much of it where...
And when I say all in camera, no CGI.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely CGI, but it's supportive. Let's call it.
But like the stuff between the two main actresses.
So there's a lot of stuff where, especially at the beginning, as Eloise is trying to sort of find her place in the 1960s world that she's sort of jumping into, we see on this side of a mirror, for example, Anna Taylor-Joy being the Sandy character. But when Sandy looks in a mirror, she sees Eloise. But the interesting thing one of the interesting things to me about this, because there's a lot of things that are really just brilliantly done in all of that, is that like at first Eloise looks back at Sandy, like they mirror each other for a minute, but then they split off, and Eloise is like kind of curiously looking out away from the mirror, into the real world, and she's kind of seeing herself, but also still. She's seeing herself as Anna Taylor-Joy, as Sandy, but also she's still herself. So she's sort of weird and conflicted about that. But over time, when they swap places, they just fully swap places, and then it's Anna Taylor-Joy looking in from the mirror. And those things, to your point, like a lot of that's done in camera, or it's done via, physical effects rather than digital effects. And there are just some utterly brilliant versions of that kind of body swap, which I mean, there are some things that I still don't know how they were done.
Not sure, but it's very effective, and it immediately draws your eye to the screen and invests you in the story, which, I mean, on the face, you going through the plot, it's pretty thin.
Sure.
I mean, there's not a lot going on.
A young girl body swaps with somebody in the 60s, and,
yeah, I mean,
but yeah.
I feel like I've seen that before. Maybe not this specific, but the way that it was executed with the visuals.
Edgar Wright, one of the reasons why Edgar Wright is one of my all-time favorite filmmakers is because he is so thoughtful about visual storytelling. And in particular, he's thoughtful about transitions. And so he's done this in a lot of movies over the years, but a lot of the movies he's done prior to this, let's say, Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead, or, really in a really big, bold, sort of aggressive way, something like Scott Pilgrim, which is just this really, like, all of the transitions and sort of camera swaps and things that he does, match cuts and stuff like that, are very blatant. They're things that are like, they're really meant to call attention to themselves. But I think that started to shift a little bit in Baby Driver. Like, Baby Driver has a lot of cool stuff in it that I think is still very flashy. But this movie, I think, was not flashy about its camera work.
No.
It was thoughtful, and it was carefully crafted. But it was not trying to draw attention to the camera move. It was trying to keep that focus on the character.
Right.
And so this, to me, feels like a little bit of Edgar Wright doing things that are really virtuosic, but now in a mature way. Like when he was younger, he did virtuosic stuff like, look at what I can do. And now it's like, look at how well I can employ this technique that no one else could do effectively to tell this story, you know. And to do that, this really speaks to me a lot, I think, in general, because he's still doing that without any pretentiousness. He's not a pretentious filmmaker. He doesn't have he's still doing basically genre movies. There's magic and, you know, like in this case, there's ghosts and you know, murders and stuff in it. Whereas, you know, I think a lot of filmmakers, when they exploit their sort of virtuosic tendencies, like a Kubrick, for example, also tend to accompany that with what I feel like is a lot of pretentiousness in their storytelling and what stories they choose to tell, what they're doing. And I don't get any sense of pretentiousness out of Edgar Wright. And that's the thing that I really enjoy about his movies. But yeah, Jen, how are what are your sort of broader thoughts on this movie?
I mean, just the character work with Sandy and Eloise.
Yeah.
And it's not just the way that those two characters contrast each other. It's also about the ways that those two characters compare very well.
Yeah.
You know, bright eyes, big city. They're there to make a name for themselves, to you know, achieve every dream that they've ever had since childhood. And they get to London and it's not quite what they expected it to be. It doesn't match their expectation. And in a real way, it's also a sort of a coming of age story for Eloise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In like understanding herself and what she actually wants and how to sort of deal with both the real world and her sort of ghost seeing gifts, as it were, and how to integrate all of that into herself so that she can not go crazy, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And it's so gorgeously done. And it would have been very, very easy for this to be an extremely lurid movie.
Yeah.
You know, for it to have been just absolutely over the top. But it wasn't. It had a delicate touch to it. And it treated both of these characters with the kind of gentleness that I would not have expected from Hollywood.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think so this is, I think let's get into some spoilers here because I want to talk about the rest of this and probably get into your second act discussion. But so basically what happens over time is that Sandy, as Anna Taylor-Joy's character, well, ultimately both of their characters together, is Sandy goes to London to become a singer, and she's very excited about this, but immediately meets a character named Jack, who's played by Matt Smith, former Doctor Who alum Matt Smith, who then becomes her manager, but more than that, he becomes the man who ultimately prostitutes her to different Johns and turns her into something that she doesn't initially want to be and doesn't seem to want to be. And he seems to package this sort of along the lines of like her being, her career and her career aspirations as a singer are being sort of sold to her as being predicated on her willingness to engage with these rich, you know, terrible men. And so, first of all, what starts as this sort of romantic, you know, lovely little story between Sandy and Jack, you know, which on the first night, you know, Eloise is all very in love with, and this is very exciting, and romance in the 60s, how wonderful. And then it immediately turns darker and darker and darker, and it gets to a point where Sandy is just beaten down by this horrible abusive person. I think to your point, Jen, like I think the movie would have been a lot worse if it sort of ended there, or ended as like on this sort of depressive note of like, oh, this is abusive man who does terrible things to this woman. But it not only doesn't do that, it also shows in Eloise's present a parallel, but potentially a parallel in the character of John, who's sort of another classmate of hers who she meets right away and she's not very sure of, and who offers to help her, offers to carry her bags up the stairs. And then, she ends up in class with him and she's very kind of curt with him at first, and she doesn't really seem to be, but he turns out to be just a wonderful person, just a really, really, really nice guy, and who likes her for who she is. And so I think that having that parallel is important, that there's the evil guy in the 60s, but there's also good people over here, that she can latch onto and actually, find goodness in the world in, but also the sort of twists that we get to towards the end. So with what happens between Jack and Sandy. And I think that that's a really critical aspect, because I don't know if it's the midpoint of the movie exactly. I kind of bet it is. Eloise is sort of romantically involved with John, but in the moment that they're sort of getting together, she keeps flashing back and forth between the last, what is probably the namesake of the film, The Last Night in Soho for Sandy, right? Which is this murder scene. So on the one hand, she's just jumping back and forth from the present with her, new budding boyfriend to the past with this abuser, and then this murder that takes place. And she then believes that Sandy has been murdered by Jack. And then a lot of the rest of the movie is really about her, trying to uncover that mystery and solve that crime, but also the reveal of what that crime actually was and what happened in all of those kinds of situations. So Paul, you said like in the second act, which is like, I don't know if you were talking about before or after that scene, but like, what's your,
yes.
What are your thoughts?
So I just want to say at the beginning of this, I love this movie. It's one of like Sean said, one of my favorite movies the last few years, but it still runs 2 hours, nearly 2 hours.
Yeah.
And there are some points in the second act where I think if you lost about 10 minutes, it'd run a little bit tighter and it would pretty much do away with all of it. But you get pretty quickly the sense of the relationship between Eloise and Sandy pretty quickly. But they keep going back to it. And it just gets a little, like, we don't learn anything from it. So, for example, the scene in the library doesn't do anything for me. It's so Eloise is after she sees the murder.
Yeah, and she's researching the murders in London around this time,
right,
trying to figure out.
And we already know that she's seeing these specters now following her, and it just plays out too long for me. It just, again, very minor.
Yeah.
But the leading into the third act, which I guess, are we going to go all the way?
Let's go for it.
But what it does well, even though it does run a little long for my taste, is does set up the suspension and the payoff at the end. It actually subverted my expectations.
Yeah.
That's a key word in Hollywood these days.
Absolutely.
But this movie actually did.
Yeah.
Which I loved. I would not see it coming at all.
So let's talk about that. What were your expectations, or Jen? I don't know if you also had these expectations, but what were your expectations that then were available to be subverted? I guess.
So. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Please
Jen.
go ahead, Paul.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Well, here we go. I genuinely believed that Jack had murdered Sandy horribly in Ellie's bedroom there
with a knife
and with a knife,
like a psycho.
It was very
bloody knife,
very psycho like, and it was very upsetting to me.
Yeah.
Like, I was genuinely upset that jerk Jack had killed Sandy.
And it was set up
he was
really
not a
well.
good guy.
I mean, you could see it coming. Like, you could feel that that's where their relationship was sort of headed,
Mm-hmm. And and oh goodness, Eloise was trying so hard to solve Sandy's murder. Like, she was doing her best, and she all she was coming across in the, I'm gonna age myself here, the microfiche collection.
I know. I was surprised.
Library.
This is one thing that sort of almost broke my suspension of disbelief in this movie. I was like, would Eloise even know what this is? I think I needed a training montage from some old librarian going like, well, dearie, this is a microfiche machine. You've never seen one before. But they used to have these things called newspapers.
But yeah, I would think that it'd all be digitized now. Apparently
not.
London is behind the 8 ball on this one.
That I find believable.
Brexit, right?
Yes, I do too. Oh goodness.
Yeah.
But all she's finding on all of these microfiche printouts of old newspapers is like these men going missing.
Mm-hmm.
And the occasional woman, but like mostly she's just finding men, because all she asked for were murders in the 60s.
Yep.
That was it. So she's getting a lot, but it's not at all what she was looking for. And in the moment, it feels incredibly frustrating because you want her to solve this crime.
Yeah.
You want her to find out who killed Sandy. And she's not getting anywhere. She's just spinning her wheels, all the while plagued by just ghosts everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're terrifying.
And they're getting worse over time. Like they're
getting worse. They're getting closer to her.
Yeah. Weird shadows become like ghoulish faces that are,
of the Johns,
obscured and unclear, and it's all the horrible men. And this is actually another area where like your expectations, I think, are really like set up in a certain way, is that like all of the ghosts seem to be the sort of faceless bodies of the men who abused Sandy over the years. And so it's like in your mind, in that context of the film, like it's all about the horror show of life that led up to Sandy's inevitable death. And like, so she's experiencing all of these things that Sandy was experiencing. So she's like all of these horrible men in and out, that she had no control over, that were doing terrible things to her. And then, it's, they get closer and closer and closer, and it's terrifying. Then she eventually sort of freaks out in the middle of the library. This, to your point, you could have maybe done without this, but
I think the biggest problem is she almost stabs her classmate.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happens.
Yeah, I wish there was a little bit more.
Very minor. I'm very minor.
Yeah,
but
I'm fine.
I'm nitpicking a little bit.
Also, just folks, don't run with scissors. It's good advice from your childhood. It continues to be good advice in adulthood. Put the scissors down. Don't do it, especially not if you're like seeing things. It's a bad call. It's a bad call. Anyway, so yeah, I agree with you, Jen. This whole sequence is just really where this kind of culminates in this kind of dark night of the soul for Eloise, and it's just terrifying. Like every aspect of it is horrible. So Eloise decides that she is going to leave. She's like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave London. Washing out of school, quitting. So John finds her in the street right afterwards. And all John wants to know, because John is a good guy.
Well,
what?
We did skip over one. So she suspected of Jack still being alive.
Oh yeah, we did skip over this part.
And there was an old gentleman who was very creepy.
He was a little creepy.
And she suspected that was Jack.
Yes.
So
I was not surprised by this, by the way.
No. So she confronts who she thinks is Jack.
Yep.
And he obviously knows something but won't tell her anything. And so she basically runs him out of the bar she's working at. He's standing in the middle of the street, gets hit by a car, dies.
Yeah.
And then immediately afterwards, the bar owner comes out and basically says, well, that's
not Jack.
That's not Jack. Yeah. His name's Lindsay. He's an old undercover cop.
Yep.
And she's kind of taken back. It's like, oh, okay, so that's not Jack, the horrible pimp that murdered Sandy. Now what?
Yeah.
And so now we go to...
Yeah, then we go to the library. She's looking for everything, and she runs out in the street. John's there, And all he does is offer to help. So she says, okay, I'm going to run back to the apartment and grab all my things and then we get out of there. And that's where the actual twist. So again, massive spoilers here, but we're into it. So we meet her landlady, who has not changed this room that she's been living in for.
And the whole movie's been so
60
super
years.
sweet, understanding.
She's been very nice. She's a strict landlady, no boys after dark and whatnot. But like, yeah,
she's an old lady. Of course, she doesn't want riffraff coming in and out.
Yep, and that meeting turns murderous very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, ultimately we discover that Sandy didn't die at all. And in fact, Sandy was the one who killed Jack. And then she's been killing many, many of these men and all of these ghosts that Eloise thought were the haunting of Sandy, and the evil men who had haunted Sandy over the course of her life are in fact haunting this building because their murders have never been solved.
And their bodies are stuffed in the floorboards and in the walls of this building.
And their bodies are everywhere. And so it's a fascinating twist. It's a very Hitchcockian twist, which I really, really enjoy. But it also changes the context of it to being something that's just like, honestly, something that in our current climate is super predictable, which is just like, yay, hero woman murders the evil man, like, which I've seen that play out again and again and again and again, to something where it's like actually opens the door to a question like, which of these two was the worst person? I mean, Jack was horrible, and Jack did unspeakable things to Sandy. It seems to me, though, that once Sandy had murdered, I believe, and I don't know that the movie makes this perfectly clear, but I believe that all of the subsequent murders happened after she murdered Jack. I believe Jack was the first, and then the rest of the men that she had murdered afterwards. And that's the point at which I start to wonder who, okay, there's a case for self-defense with Jack. There is not a case at all of self-defense when you are inviting men up to your room with their expectation that they will be,
entertained,
paying for entertainment, let's say, and they get murdered instead. And she did that dozens of times, maybe hundreds of times, it seems. And so she is a brutal, brutal mass murderer. And we can talk about trauma and everything else, but like, she made those choices. That was not a spur of the moment. Those were premeditated killings.
And even if we were to be our most generous selves here and allow that she was dealing with trauma, she was dealing with abuse, and those men were awful and deserved to die. All right, fine. But she poisoned Eloise.
And she poisons Eloise.
And then stabs.
And she stabs John.
Yep.
That cannot be justified to me.
She is actually a horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting, I think, where we get to, first of all of those subverted expectations are done in a really, I almost hesitate to use the word wonderful way because it's all terrifying and just gross and disturbing, whatever. But like, truly from a filmmaking standpoint, it is excellent because it's stuff that, like, even if you sort of predicted bits of it, like if you predicted the twist where she killed Jack and not the other way around, for example, I don't think you would have gotten that she murdered hundreds of other people or expected her to murder Eloise or try to murder Eloise, because I think, at the very end of the day, you would assume that all of those other killings were justified because she was abused. And in fact, we're not actually totally saying that. We're kind of saying, like, maybe we can justify Jack, but I don't think we can justify all of these other ones. And to your point, Jen, we certainly can't justify covering it up with more murders, and that's a pretty big jump, and it's an interesting one that not a lot of movies, I think, would have taken. And I think that's why it became one of my favorites, really, is I mean, apart from all of the the directing style and everything else, I think it actually has something to say in a way that most horror movies, thriller movies just don't.
No.
Yeah. So all right, let's wrap up our conversation about Last Night in Soho. I mean, let's do our star rating.
Yeah.
Solid star from me.
This movie gets my whole entire star. Please go watch it.
Hat trick?
I'm torn.
Ooh, not a hat trick.
Well, what I brought up earlier, I do have
Okay.
I also don't like the ending.
Like the very ending?
The very end.
Okay.
It was too 80s.
Like where she becomes a fashion designer and everything's fine.
It's like you literally just got poisoned and your
Well, it's like
boyfriend
weeks later, or whatever.
it's like the end of the semester. I don't know. So this is our grading system we're working on it.
You get to divide your star however you want.
I don't want to say like 0.9 stars because then what's the point? But I want to save that extra bit for like the next Fat Man. You know what I mean? But okay, I'll give it a star because I mean this movie was fantastic. I want everyone to see it. It's great, and the cinematography is some of the best I've seen.
It's brilliant
in a long, long time.
It's utterly brilliant. And this is one of those things. Edgar Wright, I will give tremendous marks to the cinematographer himself. That's an Edgar Wright move.
I mean, it's
it's the same as like looking at like editors who have worked with Edgar over the years. It's like credit to you, but like
it's definitely a combination between good direction and then somebody that knows their way around to do it.
For sure. Yeah. And I think this is he just continues to impress, man. And the more he does the stuff that he's doing now, the more I'm interested to see where he goes.
Yeah.
Because like all of the initial movies that he did with like Simon Pegg and whatever are great. And I just rewatched Shaun of the Dead the other day, and I love it. And then we watched Hot Fuzz not too long ago, and I'll rewatch Edgar Wright movies constantly. But like, they're just getting more mature, and it's interesting. He's just developing as a filmmaker, and his style is becoming more thoughtful, I guess, more careful, less flashy, more technique being used in service of the story itself, not just. I don't know if he's ever done it just to make a splash, but I think it's interesting. It's interesting. All right, cool. We're gonna end the show here. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully, you guys go out and see Last Night in Soho. It's a really wonderful film, and I think it's being. Probably just because it's only out in cinemas right now, I don't think as many people are talking about it as I really think they should.
I also think the marketing doesn't do them.
I don't think so.
Because they market it like almost a prestige picture, but it's a horror film.
Yeah, they should have been marketing it as a horror film.
But then also, for me...
No, I know that would have been hard, but I would have made you go see it anyway.
Well, right, but
yeah.
To me, if I went in expecting a horror movie, I wouldn't have been as impactful.
Yeah, but that's always a challenge with films like this. I think Edgar Wright's a tough director to pin down.
Yeah.
I think sorry, not to take a tangent right at the end of the show, but Shaun of the Dead came out when I was in college, when I was working at a movie theater, and I saw the poster, which had Shaun with like a cricket bat and the folks around him, and it said a romantic comedy with zombies, and I was like, I'm in. That sounds hilarious to me. That sounds like something that doesn't take itself too seriously and that just is so weird that I want to go see it, and it was brilliant. But I also think that was a tough sell for people as well, because I don't think people knew what to make of it. It's a really sweet, really heartfelt film, fundamentally just about a guy trying to get it together enough to win back his girlfriend who's on the verge of kicking him to the curb permanently, and there's zombies, and it's happening in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, which again, it's like, you can do this, like Army of the Dead.
Yeah. Oh,
what a great concept. Would do a heist movie in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Cool, great idea. Shaun of the Dead, executed
a rom-com
properly, a rom-com in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Army of the Dead, heist movie in the middle of apocalypse, utter failure, worthless. So, anyway, Edgar Wright's tough, but go see it. It's great. And if you liked what you guys just listened to or saw, please make sure you check us out on YouTube. Make sure you watch Out of Frame. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, a little bit. Discord,
yeah.
Join our email list also. Our email list is good. It's weekly emails, original content every week. And check us out on Patreon and Subscribestar. If you are already a supporter on Patreon or Subscribestar, stick around, and we're going to do some viewer questions right after this. For everybody else, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.